Well, I'm sorry about my pronunciation, it's horrendous. But Mendes, my name is Catalina Mendes. I'm very happy to see you all here. Good morning and welcome back. I'm a senior lecturer in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese at Princeton University. And I just wanted to give you a little background. I have been collaborating in a few projects that relate to indigenous languages and cultures. And I currently teach a class about non-colonial languages in the Americas. And this past summer, I was grateful and fortunate to participate in the first language, Lunaape Language camp, where I met many of you for the first time and again, many of you too. And I'm a linguist by training, but I'm also a language teacher. And so I'm very happy to see these kind of events that like the language camp and the symposium that are bringing together so many wonderful people, language, community members, language keepers, language activists, educators, from all walks of life, from all backgrounds. And so I'm happy to see that. And so I'm here just as a local helper, just to help out in these, in facilitating, kind of this reunion of community members and language keepers and educators. And just wanted to tell you a little bit about the first session. So we're gonna have 2 sessions today in the morning that directly relate to language. And we have had many conversations about these in past events on how each community might have different needs and have different histories, and but something that unites everybody is language, right? And that is kind of the foundation of a lot of the discussions that are going on here. And so that's kind of the point of today's sessions in the morning, right? Is to kind of go back to that point of language. And so in our first morning session, we're gonna have a roundtable discussion with McCallum, Velma, Karelle, and Kristin Jacobs. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves, talk about themselves, but I just wanted to explain that the point of this first session is going to be to have them talk a little bit about what's going on in their communities in terms of any kind of updates that they'd like to share since the last time that we met here. And that's it. I don't know, Ian, do you want to start? Oh, right here, you're right here. Okay. So thank you, Ian. All yours.
Guess that's what you get for coming in last, right? So the teacher can keep you while you're sort of working. Like na poundy wamawen, Kolomalsimwa, Dita Shinzi Ian, Ninon Jari Nalahi, Shuknawiki on Barrie, Ontario. I was busy trying to scroll down all of the things that are going on in Munsee. I gave an update to Chief and Council on Monday, but it wasn't a fulsome list. It was sort of an update that would satisfy for coming down here to Princeton. With the passing of Karen last September, I've tried to find an environment in which I can support the language work for Munsee, but also sort of maintain a full-time job and also try to finish a PhD. So it's been quite a balancing act. My PhD work is involved with Munsee language, so the 2 feed each other. So it's not like it's not added work, but it has been a challenge with Karen's passing. And to be honest, most of the work that's happened since July has been resource creation. And I understand that resource creation doesn't necessarily make speakers, but I feel that there's so many stories that come out of being prompted or asked to do research into wampum, or to take a look at treaty agreements, even taking a look at Munsee people living on the south side of the Thames River. that you go into these rabbit holes. We talked about that yesterday, and I know that people sort of commiserated with that whole, if you go, you may never come back out, right? Your job, your daytime job is pulling you out. Like you got to do some work actually. But those things really do contribute to the, the lexicon, the words, and I think the understanding of the Munsee language as a whole. What I can share this morning, because I don't want to take up all the time, and I could, because I think there's a lot of exciting things that are happening. The first thing that's going to happen in 2 weeks' time, this is a partnership with the University of Western Ontario. I can't call it Western University, I just simply can't. It's just not going to happen. So I worked with the GIS department there to create a map of Southwestern Ontario. The map is interactive and it has the place names of Southwestern Ontario in the Munsee language. So it's more of a map for Munsee people as opposed to anyone else, because that's what we call certain places in Ontario. It's interactive where it has the research links where I found the information, but you can also hear my terrible voice actually doing the Munsee language. So you can click it and you can hear the place name. And my thought behind this activity or this partnership was to support our K-12 learners. So when those Munsee students go to high school or they're sitting in grade 7 and 8 at Delaware Central, that this is an added resource that they have that can support or perhaps be in place of whatever Canadian history they're getting now. And that's that whole process of, especially for grade 7 and 8 history, because that is a time period from, 1750 to present, or sorry, 1914. It's really fairly critical, right? That local students understand that the Munsee people have been in Ontario for that time period or longer. And here's an opportunity where you can actually reach out and have a resource that's easily available for everyone. So that's exciting, and I appreciate that support of Miles and IS in terms of finding those place names, those recordings that were done in the 1960s and the 70s. And as well, Velma and Kristin, I really appreciate your support on that too. I was a recipient of a sort of a $75,000 grant from the United Way of Elgin, Middlesex. And it was a community partnerships. It's a piece to support communities that are coming out of the pandemic. So with that, we've been able to create a series of 2 history videos about the community that were filmed at Longwood's conservation area in a building that has significance to Munsee-Delaware. So it was home to several families at Munsee, and it's probably the oldest structure that came from our community that still exists. So we created a couple of history videos. We've also created a couple of language videos. The funny thing about Southwestern Ontario is I always go there because there's no bugs. And yet this summer there was nothing but mosquitoes. So the videos are kind of like this. And the photographer, the filmmaker, the person who I was working with on that, it's like, I'm sorry, this isn't usually the way. And we were going to do a walk in the woods and document the trees and the plants and the language. There was not a chance we were going to do that. So it would be still photos because we wouldn't be able to get either photos because the bugs were in front of us. But you can record us either, right? With the need to head to higher ground that wasn't wet. So, and again, those videos are for the community. How to host them and where to put them appropriately is going to be the next question, but it all adds to that resource bank that anyone can access, but also sort of, it's thinking about that next generation, right? This is the work that I can do and leave behind. So for someone else who can pick up that torch. The tree and plant species research work is my next thing. I wasn't able to get out on the Thames River this year because things were busy and every month seemed to be spoken for. But I do hope to get back out there in 2024. And I do need to start to come down into this part of the world and continue sort of the work of looking at rivers and looking at the trees and plants. And as I was just talking with Lisa, before we came in. There's a reason why the Munsee people settled on the Thames River, right? And there's very direct correlations between the environment here in New Jersey and the environment on the Thames River as well. And it's trying to sort of taking your mind back to the 1780s, if we want to give it a date, and think about that piece. So that's my next activity with a partnership from community artists in terms of creating the illustrations of the leaves and the plants, and then providing something similar to the place names where there's an audio ability. And local organizations have been helped. There's Trees Canada, who's interested in creating a poster, much like I think it's a group out in Wisconsin, Ojibwe, have created, or in upper Michigan, where they've created a poster of trees in their language. And I'd like to create the audio version of that as well. The Anishinaabe Nation in Ontario is a big political body that acts on behalf of many Anishinaabe nations in Ontario. They reached out recently and asked for 50 phrases in the Munsee language. And they gave me a nice tight timeline of October the 31st. So I'm grateful for the resource bank that we have, that I was able to put that together. But what I'm noticing, and maybe it's because we're more vocal as Munsee people, or we're, that it's hard to ignore. We're a part of the Anishinaabe Nation, even though we're Munsee people. I know Moravian Town's part of another political organization in Ontario, but essentially they can't ignore the fact that there's two languages in the Anishinaabe Nation. There is Ojibwe, but there's also Munsee. So they've been kind enough to reach out, and they reach out all the time. So I don't want to say no. I don't have enough time. I'll pool together those 50 phrases that you want to do that. So they create a calendar every year. It's quite a beautiful calendar that they do we'll do it in 3 languages now. So the Munsee is now going to be part of that. Their education body, who I work in partnership with my daytime job, has been very vocal in terms of including Munsee language, opening prayer within the educational work that they do, because Munsee-Delaware is also part of what's called the Kinamadzuin education body. So I don't want to say no, because I think that it's really important that if they're trying to do the right thing as an education body, that I support that. All this being said, I haven't had a language class in the community in the new school year. So I'm well aware of that, and I'd like to host one in the new year. Things have been very busy in my personal life as well, so it's been hard to get down to provide that. There's 2 more final items. I'm sorry to my other fellow language speakers. I feel like I'm taking too much time here. There's community stories. 2 community stories are currently being finished. One's called The First Kiss of Winter. It is a story that's been given by John Nicholas, who's a community member. He wanted the story translated into the Munsee language. It was originally recorded in English. He reached out a year ago to ask that to be done. It's a learning process. So when someone gives you a 7-page story in English and wants it translated into Munsee, you should maybe just double check on that, because that's a long period of work for someone who's a second language speaker to do it correctly and to do a good job. However, I'm within a paragraph now of completing that work. He also stipulated that he wanted an artist from Munsee to illustrate that. So with the support of a distant relative, Ella Johnson is going to be illustrating that. So that's being done now too. It will also be, and I searched for this word when I was talking with my sister about this, it's going to be animated. So it's going to have a bit more interaction. And again, this is all to support K-12 adult education language learners. So it's an exciting piece that's coming up. And also a long overdue research project that I started when I was, 18, and I was forced to do a history project in grade 13. It's about my great uncle Arnold Logan, who was one of the first soldiers in World War I. That story is coming to a finish now as well. But it will be published first in the English language, then in the Munsee language, simply because John's story came before this one, so I had to prioritize. I couldn't do both. But we're looking at doing a series of events in August of 2024 in St. Thomas, Ontario, and on the Reserve, because that's where Arnold lived when he first signed up for war in 1914. So we're kind of marking the 110th anniversary of his decision to join the Canadian Expeditionary Force. Again, the book will be in English first, but it will be in Munsee shortly after that. I'm currently looking at how to publish it. And with that same group that has filmed history and language, I'm going to engage them to sort of create videos in terms of following Arnold's footsteps before he left London, Ontario to go to Valcartier, Quebec. And the other piece that seems to fall off the table and shouldn't is the language teachers get together. We talked a lot about it in July. And Susan Dion at York University and myself have talked a lot about it in terms of organizing that. So hopefully in January, we'll get together out at Munsee or in town, and we can sort of talk about language as teachers together and share ideas, but also look at the path forward. And I think that's it from my perspective. And again, I could go on, but I want to give the mic to someone else. Anishi.
Eelunaapeewi, and she Shawan Kuyan, Kristin Jacobs, Ashinzion, Shapian Hilanixion, Nina Manitowi, Ashinzion, Loanakan Okwe. We chow dummy Munsee walk no NGI Eelunaapeewi Lahkeewiit. So as I was saying, my English name is Kristin Jacobs and my spirit name is Northwind, and I'm from Eelunaapeewi Lahkeewiit and Wolf Clan. I currently work outside of my community in the school where kids from our community attend. I teach kindergarten to grade 8, but our Delaware starts at grade 1. I say kindergarten because I'm in both of our kindergarten classes daily, offering prep coverage. But that helps when those students get to grade 1 and they have the choice of taking Delaware or French. And I have a few every year that choose Delaware. So out of the 50 to 55 or so students that I teach, about 15 of them have no Delaware background. They're just attending because we have a lot of fun in my class. So some of the things that we've been doing, I'm going to speak to just activities that we're doing in the classroom because they involve the youth from our community. I've been very fortunate being able to attend these events and meet the people here, and was given some of the white corn seeds last year of our Munsee corn. I traveled to upstate New York where I received some bean and squash seeds, and we were able to plant those seeds and make a Three Sisters garden right at our school. And the students took care of that garden in June. And then the local university of Guelph, one of the parents works there and offered to take care of the plants during the summer when we weren't there. So when we came back in the fall, we were able to harvest those. Our white corn turned out a tad yellow because of the local corn. We live in an agricultural community, a lot of cornfields. The only place you'll see trees is in our community. So yeah, we've been doing a lot of teaching, like what I'll be talking about later. I noticed about the students really enjoying seeing and hearing the language as opposed to seeing the words in our language. They can be a little scary looking, so I try not to introduce those until they're later grades, because they're learning English at the same time, and if they can't make sense to English, I'm not sure they're gonna make sense to some of the letters in our language. So we just work on hearing it and speaking it to each other, and having lots of fun. So that's about all I can share right now as far as what I'm doing with my students. I am like we were saying earlier, how being a full-time teacher and then trying to offer support outside of that can get a little busy. So when I'm asked about different projects, I really try to look at how is it going to help my students and my community, or is it just going to satisfy their Indigenous needs? Another thing that happened this year was that I was given a period called Indigenous from my school. So I asked what exactly that meant because it wasn't attached to any class. And they said, oh, it's just, that's 40 minutes a week. You can offer Indigenous content to the classrooms in our school. But we have about 11 or 12 classrooms. And some of those are split grades, and their Indigenous content differs from grade to grade. So I'm thinking, I have all my classes, and then you want me to go through all of that curriculum and try to find something? I said, no, I don't think so. So I said, I talked to the teachers in my school, and I said, and I explained to them how I felt a little overwhelmed by that, but that I could come into their classroom and share with them different things that are going on in our community or things that we're doing at that time of year, and they can connect it to the curriculum. So that seems like it would be, and work better that way. They were able to come into my classroom and harvest the sunflower seeds from our 3 sister gardens. A lot of our classes can talk about the 3 sisters and name who's the oldest, middle, younger sister. So I really feel like there's a lot of relationship building going on in our school, which will lead to better relationships in the future with our youth. Thank you.
Eelunaapeewi, Delawans, Karelle, Nanticoke. It's good to see everybody again today, and saying that it's good to see everyone. I'm Karelle, and I am Nanticoke and Lunaape, and so I like to claim both of those areas in my introduction. So our language journey is I suppose a little bit more of a fledgling journey compared to what Munsee speakers are working on. It's been really valuable for me to join many of the Munsee initiatives to really help me figure out how to encourage our language program, to help figure out like what directions we can take it. So since last year, we've had some very exciting developments in our language program, and I brought a little visual aid to show you. This is our first ever Nanticoke language book, published in our language. It's a, as you can see, it's colorful. It's built as a children's book, but recognizing that we don't have any first language speakers of Nanticoke in our community. Everybody is everyone's starting at the beginning, and so it's being marketed towards our children with the colors and the simple designs, but we're hoping for it to be for kids of all ages, and adults and elders and everyone who wants to engage with the language. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about our process of getting to this book and then some of what we're hoping to do in the future. So this book, we wrote it in connection with a linguist who is a non-Indigenous linguist, but one who has an interest in our language and in other Algonquin languages. We had an elder in our community who had this idea that she wanted she saw this book in her head. So she imagined a children's book, a way to bring the language back to the children. And so during the early days of the pandemic in 2020, we started drafting this book, and we finally published it this past summer in August. And we were able to debut it at our powwow in September. And so within the book, there are, we have this grandmother turtle character who is designed slightly after the elder in question. If you were to see a picture of her, you would actually see a resemblance. And our artist, our illustrator for this book, is one of our community members. She does, she's a very talented artist, and we wanted to make sure that we had as much community participation in this creation as possible. The main contributors on the book are also all captured here in cartoon and animated form. And so also some of the, there are no stock photographs, so the book has both illustrations and photographs in here. All of the photographs of people, there's no stock images, they're all of actual community members, taken and used with permission by them. So just trying to add different layers of value to this project. And this summer, I had the opportunity to start to try to teach from it, to teach our youth. And so I am also a beginning language learner and trying to be a language teacher at the same time, which is difficult, but trying to work on that. So I had an opportunity to teach a little bit of the language to our youth at a youth camp that we have. And one of the really fun things that we did with it is I was encouraging them to have short little conversations with each other and learn a little vocabulary. And so I taught them the name for siblings and the terms for greeting each other. And so all of our kids, it's a small community, we're all related. And so all of our kids are, cousins with each other. And in Nanticoke, the word for sibling and the word for cousins are the same thing. And so the words that you use are they're not based on whether they're your sibling or your cousin, but based on whether they are an older female relative, an older female sibling or cousin, an older male sibling or cousin, or a younger one that's a gender neutral term. And so I did this fun exercise with them where in the room, these were our teenagers, they had to go and introduce themselves to all of their other cousins in the room. But they had to know whether or not that was an older cousin or a younger cousin. And so it was just sort of a fun interactive way that was to get them to start using the language in a way that was both fun and relevant for them. And so I'm really hoping to do some more projects. We're still trying to figure out how to even offer community classes and language classes. Right now they're just sort of these small little exercises because we are also trying to train teachers because, the people who are able to teach are also like me, we're learning the language and trying to teach it at the same time. But this book is one of the first steps for our project, for our language project. We're also hoping to start to build an archive so that, because there's a lot more of our language that isn't in this book. We want to have some future materials, future books, some storybooks, but also I think having an online sort of central database is going to be useful. One, so that when the few people who are working on this project right now are no longer around, that no future generations of people are going to have to start from scratch again. We want to make sure that they are going to have access to everything that we have access to today. So that is one of, I guess, my next personal projects, as well as trying to figure out, community classes. And then I just wanted to share one more really fun piece from this book. And it's in the final pages of the book. This elder, who is also a storyteller and a poet, she created this poem. It's called Matashi, which means never again. And this poem is basically stating that, you know, our languages are never going to be forgotten, and that we are gonna have our languages for our future. They tried to erase them, but, you know, we are still here and we will be here. And one phrase that gets repeated often is Munsee-Delaware, which means we have not been forgotten. And so what we did with this poem is we actually, we created a song from it. A song in the Lunaape language, and it's in the same style as our, you know, our old Lunaape songs. So not in that sort of like powwow song cadence that, you know, comes from those tribes out west, but in the same sort of style as many of our old traditional songs. So we're creating a new traditional song, and we created a dance that goes along with it that has, it's sort of a shuffling step. It's not all that different from some of our other traditional dances. And we would have people line up, you know, male and female, and they'd hold rattles, and as they dance this counterclockwise, like we do for many different Lenape songs. And after the end of each verse, the lead, and we usually have the elders dancing in front and the youth dancing in the back. And as you end each verse, those elders would step aside and they'd pass that rattle on to the next people in line. And so, you know, symbolizing that, passing that knowledge on to each continuing generation. And we were able to, we composed this song this summer, and at the end of the language camp, when many of our relatives were able, from Munsee and from other places and from Stockbridge, were able to come, and Moravian Town, I want to name all of them, were able to come to Bridgeton, to our community. We were able to present this song to some of them there. So it was a really beautiful opportunity to present it to Molly and to some of the other people who were there. And we were able to also present this song and dance to our community at our powwow in September. So these books, last thing, are, I have several of them with me today. They're over on the back wall there. So during the breaks, you can take a look at them. If anyone wants to purchase one, you know, I have some available for that as well. And then next to them is also the book that Joanne was talking about yesterday. And the book also comes with a CD, because our languages are primarily spoken languages, they're audio languages. And so I don't just want people to look at the words in this book and try to figure out how to say them. So we also recorded an audiobook version of the book that goes along with it. Manishi.
Yalam Gomati, Lidishinzi Madrana Kadokwe, Eelunaapeewi, Eelunaapeewi, Good morning, everyone. I don't want to repeat what I've said. I've talked a lot about language. Language has always been my first love since I was always there, wondering about it, knew that we never were ever taught enough of it. In kindergarten, I remember like dog, pig, cat, 10, weed butt. Never forgot that one, just because it sounded weird, had the word butt in it. So you never forgot those kind of things. So, but as becoming a mother and those kind of things that made you, like, is that all? Like there's got to be more. So I knew that there was things missing. So around the age of 30 was when I went after it, and it wasn't a very easy process. But it was probably the most rewarding and the most challenging thing that I've ever done in my life. And it's not done. It doesn't mean that I've come to a point where I know this and that's enough. That's not the way it is, because I'm still learning. I'm not on. So yeah, so I'm still learning. I appreciate Karelle, like developing resources from community for community as a very heartfelt connection that our people, our children, it means more because it came from somebody from our community. So it's like, you know, when these people grow up, we could say, oh yeah, you know, 50 years ago, so-and-so from our community made this book in collaboration with other community members. And that's what we need to do. Like, we need to do the same thing. Because, you know, we have young, you know, like I have grandchildren already, and I don't want my grandchildren to suffer or to run around and try to find out ways to say things. Where do I look? Who do I ask? All the questions that I had, I don't want my grandchildren to run around and wonder, where do I have to go to learn language? I want them to have it easy, accessible. I know where to go without any struggles. So that's what I want. And I want that for all of our grandchildren, for those kind of things to be available for them. So as everybody knows, I'm a student. Language is always there, and language is part of culture, history, you know, like what Kristin talked about. It's like, you know, maybe when Fairfield gets up, your class can come to visit us, you know, and that's collaboration. Because we do need to educate the public school system about who we are, and to not put those heavy burdens on you, because it's connected. They want everything to be done by you because that's where you are, which isn't fair either. Unless you're gonna pay big bucks for that. They have no problem paying big bucks to someone else, right? So, you know, like we deserve just as much as anyone else, if not more, because of the things that tragedies we suffered over generations. So I still teach language online, whoever asks me to do those kind of things. I don't run any classes, I've offered to, but again, you know, I'm a full-time student, I work full-time, so it's a heavy load. But you know, whatever I can do to help. Mostly right now, I'm a resource. Like I said before, our community has been part of our residential school settlement, so we got 2.4 billion just for our community. That's not shared money. I just wanted to make that clear. So we do have money, but money isn't gonna save the language. It's our individual selves, and it's our drive, it's our commitment, it's our willing to do work that's gonna make that happen. And that's the important part. Like, you can sit back and always say, well, we don't have money for this, we don't have money for that. It's like, yeah, well, you can still learn language. You can still speak language, and you can still teach language with no money. And it's just the willingness to wanna do that, to spread that, to share it, to give it to someone. So that's always there. But that 2.4 billion that we're gonna get, to release the first 200,000 of that, we have to have a plan for our community, and it has to reach those 4 pillars, which is language, culture, heritage, and well-being. And they're all connected. They're, you know, you can't, you know, they like to separate, oh, language over here, culture over here. It's like, it's not separate, it's the same thing. And there's teachings within the language about who we are. So it's important to learn language because that's the foundation of identity. Everything from that will tell you a story about your culture, the way we did things, why we did them that way, why they're called those things. There's a story within every language word that's connected to culture, past, history, language, heritage. All those things are all connected. So they're not separate. But they like to separate them. So that plan, so there's a task force, it's called Band Repatriation Task Force, and it's those 4 pillars that we have to address. So we have 2 counselors and 4 community members on there. So we sit, you know, every week or every other week and talk about what are we gonna do. We take a look at our language department in the community that has been running for 7 years, I believe, as an immersion program, something like that. 10 years, sorry, my bad, which is even worse. 10 years of immersion, but there's no programming in the community. So if you're in immersion for 10 years, you should be a speaker. Am I right? If you guys had access to a 10-year immersion program, how many of you would be speakers? Put your hand up. How many of you would want to be a speaker if you took 10 years of your life to be, right? Exactly. You know, if I had that opportunity again, I would take it. But these are the issues that we have in our community. It's like, why isn't there no language programming? I don't know. So that's why this task force is trying to help. Like, we're not pointing fingers, we're just trying to move this along because we're running out of time. It's time sensitive. We have one elder speaker, 82 years old, I believe she is, just had a birthday. You don't know how long we have, but we need to start moving ahead. We need to start looking at the children, like I said, I want my grandchildren to know the language. So what needs to be put in place for that? And I'm pretty sure everybody at that council table, everybody in the community wants those things for their grandchildren and future generations. Because if we lose language, nobody does anything, then who are we? Who are we? We're just a bunch of non-speaking, can we even say we're Lenape?
Yeah, wants to be a descendant.
Yeah, and I don't like to be talked about like this is who we were, like it's the past, so I don't want to talk about things like that. So we have to move forward. So that's what we do, is we sit around and talk about what kind of things. And so I'm a resource because I've been involved in language for about 20 years. So I've traveled around and I met lots of people, made a lot of friends with a lot of people that are speakers, fluent speakers, elders, workers, and I still have contact from going to Lakehead. I still have contacts with those people. They're the ones that help me teach Ojibwe. Hey, how do you say this? Send a message, boom, ready to get it back. Oh yeah, they'll send a recording, okay, got it, So it's like there's people there. So the things that they do, we can borrow ideas from other communities, and because I've been involved in language, I can understand some of the what are the best practices. Times have changed, things that didn't work. You hear from people, well, we tried this and it didn't work. Oh, we tried having language classes and they didn't work. It's like, well, what didn't work about them? Tell me what, Of course, there's no response about why they didn't work. It's like, well, maybe you didn't want to teach it. I don't know. So let someone else do it. But those are the kind of things that we need to figure out so we can navigate our way through, overcome the challenges so that we have language, so that it's strong again. The foundation is strong and we always have somewhere to go. So, one of the ideas I brought forth to this task force was, our Chippewa just down the river there, they have Anishinaabe speaking challenges. And I was like, oh, so I met a girl, hey, send me your rules, send me your flyer. How do you guys do this? So she emails me and I said, did you do that challenge? She said, yep. And I said, oh, she won first 4 times. 4 times she won it. And now she teaches at the daycare and she's a pretty semi-fluent speaker. And I was like, oh, 4 years, huh? We had 10 over here.
$10,000 every year.
Yeah, so I was like, okay, well, how about we, take a run at this and see how it works out. Of course, I think it's fear mostly, fear of having to learn language and try things that you've never really, involved yourself fully in. But that's part of what we have to overcome is our own individual fear about the things that we have to do. So I wanted to downscale it a bit, let's do it for 4 months instead of 8 months, because they had an 8-month program. They had, I think it was 200 phrases, not words, phrases, which is, there's a difference there. Like, what am I going to learn? Like I said, I was in kindergarten, I knew 10 words. That didn't carry me through life. That carried me till I was 30 and said, wait a minute, this is not enough. Does this make me Lenape, these 10 words? No, it doesn't. So I wanted to downscale it, do 40 phrases, and let's make the pot, I don't know, $1,000 or 2,000 something. So then it's always, well, where are we going to get the money from? Blah, blah, blah. We'll figure it out, but let's do it. Let's put it out, in the community, because I know there's people that really, really want language. So yesterday I talked about the community engagement session. We had surveys. What do you guys want to do? And it was a survey that was like 100 questions about language, about your own thoughts about language. Those were answered. You got a gift card for answering it. You got a free meal. You got to come to the community. So all that information is done. And on there, almost like 90%, 95% of the people that filled it out want language. They want language classes. They want language in the daycare. They just want language. That's what they want. So I said at that task force, if you guys are going to go ask community what they want, then you better deliver it. That's what I said. You can't keep asking, because round and round we go, 10 years of immersion. Where are we, So we need to start putting things in action instead of just sitting and wanting. It's like, we have to start doing things. And I said on the task force, to make that commitment, I'll go to community and say, yep, starting in September, I'll do 1 night of language class. We need to access all the people that know language. It's not one person's responsibility. Not only one person knows it, and not only one person is responsible to share it. If you know a little bit, then you have something to offer. So I said, we have Kristin, we have myself, we have Kayleen, we have different people in the community that know various degrees. People learn in different ways, they teach in different ways. Why not access all of them? What's wrong with having, maybe team teaching, have 2 people. She could teach something that she really likes teaching, and someone else can teach something, like we have to work together collaboratively to make sure that language grows, because right now it's just sitting there and it needs to start unfolding and start, so that's one of the things so I'm mostly a resource to language revitalization, and whatever I'm asked to do, I do mostly, if I can. As for teaching at school, I think, I've outgrown that part of my life, because there's something more for me, and that's why I'm not in the school system anymore. Yeah, and that's just a personal choice. I love the kids, I love kids. It's just, there's something else. As for creating resources and stuff like that, like I've done those things, and it's like, well, let the younger people do it. You have everything now, all the technology that's up, let them do it. There's people that are, people that are born Lenape are born with gifts. And those people need to have the opportunity to share those gifts so that our language will grow, our language, culture, history. We have artists that are born, the book you did, we have artists in our community too that aren't acknowledged. They need to be acknowledged. What can you offer us in our community to be able to, have a book too? Well, how about you do the artwork?
Do a draw along video.
There's all kinds of stuff we can do. And we need to access our community so that those people, they feel pride in what they've contributed to the future, because that's what it is, right? So it's important for community to do the work for community, because it means more. It's a heart connection to ancestors. It's a heart connection to our language, and it's a heart connection to our future yet to come. That's what we have to focus on when it comes to language and culture and history, that part. It's not in your head, it's in your heart. So if your heart is letting you, I'm gonna go in here and I'm afraid, but I'm gonna teach anyway, and this is what I learned, you'll be surprised at when you're done how big your heart has grown, and how much you feel good about yourself and what you've given. That's what you need to focus on, So that's all I'm gonna share in a sheet.
Kristin, Karelle, Velma. For me personally, it's very exciting to see and to hear all of these updates. I remember Karelle talking about the book in the last symposium, and actually seeing it in person is amazing. So I'm very happy to hear all these. So I think we have about 20 minutes, I think, for maybe a short discussion. So I think we're gonna switch the format here of the camera to show everybody, maybe format of the camera to show you. Yeah. So I think we're just gonna open up for discussion. Who wants to ask questions, make a comment?
The ceiling mic should pick everything up for folks over Zoom. These flat panels are ceiling mics,
So should
but it's
we,
not amplifying the voice.
should I pass this around?
No need to pass the mic.
Speaking of.
Being at the front really does
It's the sound travel.
who's first. Camera.
There any questions? me, or I didn't know who you were pointing. Oh, I just want to say, thank you so much to the people involved. It's really moving. I think it's kind of now is the time for change. And I just want to share something. When I was younger, I shot something for the Smithsonian Museum, and it was my mother. We went down to Oklahoma, and the project was shooting the oldest fluent Delaware speaker, and it was Lucy Blaylock. And my mother growing up only taught us a couple words, but she said, oh, I don't really know the language. And I remember as a kid, I only knew like cat, dog, and like, but I was kind of sad, anyway, about not knowing the language. But so I'm setting up the camera and the lights, and I hear two people speaking Delaware and laughing and joking. And I'm like, oh, someone else came in. And I went in the room, and it was Lucy Blaylock and my mother. And it was, I know it sounds stupid, but like, it was really intense to realize I was older. I was like probably in my 20s or something. And here's my mother speaking fluent Delaware. Yet she didn't teach us as kids. Do you know what I mean? And it was like a really powerful thing. But then I was like, okay, focus, just like the interview, but it was like, I've never forgotten that. And so for me personally, I think it's so moving that you're doing this. It's awesome. And also I'm like a professional filmmaker. So if I can ever help, part of what I want to do, actually, I'm not supposed to really talk about it, but I'm working with a guy who's Haudenosaunee, and we're going to do a program based on keeping the language alive. And I was like, I'll do this with you, and we'll do your nation first because we're moving forward. He met with his council, but I was like, I want us to do this for Delaware too. And I was like, so, maybe we could talk about that. And so, but it's just amazing, regardless, what you guys are doing. So thank you. Anish.
I have a question. Karelle, did you get funding to help pay for that book?
Yes.
A grant?
Well, so we got an initial grant, I think it was like $10,000 grant to start some of the work. And we were able to use some of that to pay our artist, and a couple of other things. The rest of it was honestly fundraising and getting individual donations. And then now that we have the book sales are all going, fully 100% back into the project. So helping to sort of fund those next projects.
Awesome. I just have a little story. I didn't know there was any other language until the 90s. I grew up in I didn't know there was any language until our home phone was connected, and when you picked your phone up, you heard everybody else's conversation. And every time I would pick the phone up, my neighbor would start talking this language. And then she'd be like, so they were talking Delaware. And I'm like, what is that? Anyway, so I put the phone down. A little while later, I was like, pick it back up, and they would start talking Delaware again because they knew somebody else was on the phone. She just lived down the road from me, and I'm like, what are they talking about?
It was probably Lila and Laura.
It was. And so I ended up taking a cultural course, and Diane Snake was the teacher. And I'm like, oh, I should get into that. I don't really know nothing about the culture and language. And so I ended up taking it, and it was really interesting. There was probably a dozen people taking it, and so we had crafts and we had history, but I liked hers the best because there was a lot of laughter too, right? Because I didn't really know any of the language, and it was really interesting to just sit and listen to everybody because everybody joked and laughed about it because we laugh a lot. And I would always try to say these words, and I had an elder sitting right next to me. And he'd always pat my back. You can say it. Come on. And his nickname was Squirrely. And he always wanted me to not worry about how I said it. And then he goes, there's no wrong way about saying language. It's the way you say it. And I was like, okay. So there was somebody sitting here, and then I had Bruce Stonefish. And
he would lean over like this and he'd look at me and go, sort of like, come on, Catherine, you can say it. And I'd be trying to say it and I couldn't look toward him because he made me laugh every time I looked at him. And then there was a lot of hands-on learning. Diane would, we did one part where we would introduce ourselves and try to say these phrases. And that was funny too. And then one day we learned how to set a table, sit down, and she had all the plates, the dishes and everything, all the utensils, and she would just like center you right out, right? She goes, you can come up here. And I'd be walking up there, I was like, no, I don't want to do this. And yeah, she made it a lot of fun. And the other students were like, everybody kind of helped each other, and which was good. And I really remember a lot of that time. And then we had to do the craft part of it. And I'm not into crafts, but I tried. The beading, I never ever beaded before.
Still can't.
So I had to. I was like, what is this? And so she was trying to thread it for me, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to come here anymore. Then I started beading, and the beads just looked terrible. And one of the beads fell out one day, and I was like, oh my God, I almost got it done, and I wrecked it. So Mary White-Eye was our instructor for that, and she was just like, oh, that's okay, we can fix that, I think. But yeah, that was in the early 90s, and the language came into the daycare. I was in the daycare for 25 years, but we didn't have language all that time. And I remember Velma coming in, and at that time we had like 30 students, I think, and it was fun, but just kind of drifted away. Like all of a sudden we didn't have language anymore. And like I do remember a lot of the resources and stuff were made, but it wasn't the same. Wasn't the same looking at cat, dog, fruit, vegetables. And a lot of the little kids were really excited about like learning different words and stuff like that, but wasn't really fulfilling. But I just thought I'd share that. Thank you.
Oh, okay. So I know in the United States, and I'd like to find out more from Canada, that my parents went to an Indian boarding school in Wisconsin. So I know people who went to boarding schools weren't supposed to speak their language, and that was condemned. But by World War I, when our soldiers go off, actually that's where it started, is some of the code talking with different tribes. And I know Menominee, I know Navajo, many other tribes. Had they been using that language to help win the war. So World War II, major credit to Navajo and many other tribes, Comanche, whoever all spoke. But so it's interesting that our language was pushed aside and said no, but yet they were using it, and we helped, win the war. We because of using our native languages. And I'm wondering, in Canada, Cody or anybody else who's ancestors, did you remember your soldier families using the language during the?
So it wasn't as embedded as formally, in the United States, there's almost a formal use of certain indigenous languages, but that was not really embedded in the Canadian military tradition in Canada. But I know that one thing about my family is if you look at census records, you can so clearly track when a loss of indigenous languages occurred. As I was saying to somebody yesterday, the census just sort of says languages spoken English and Indian for so many years, and obviously you don't know which Indian language unless you kind of know who the ancestors are. But you can see that the generation where I know for a fact my grandparents went to the Indian residential school system, and when they're children it lists English and Indian, then when they're adults it simply says English, right? So that the annihilation of indigenous languages was firmly embedded in the residential school system, and you can see that reflected through the census records. But unless other Canadian historians here want to correct me, it wasn't embedded in our military system to the same extent. But I know that soldiers, when they were overseas, did speak the language sort of in the trenches as sort of that informal code usage, but actually just building on that thought, one thing that's interesting about my research sort of before this family lineage is about commemoration in public history. And what's interesting is we're seeing a lot of residential schools in Canada being commemorated now as national historic sites, and some community members are kind of proactively commemorating these schools, some are less actively. But an interesting example, building on your thought, is the former Assiniboia Residential School in Winnipeg, Manitoba. There was discussions to have the site of that school commemorated as a national historic site, and survivors didn't want that commemorated, but they want the playground commemorated, because the playground is where they still spoke their language, sort of in protest. And there's a specific rock as well where they went and they spoke their language kind of informally. And because of that community effort, the municipality of Winnipeg has commemorated the park as a heritage site, and now we're trying to get federal recognition. And Mary Jane, do you know anything about that as well?
Yeah, I've been there. It's quite amazing. Yeah, it's right near Polo Park, which is a kind of big shopping area of the city. And so there's a whole kind of block. They have a monument there. And yeah, it's the old building is there, and it's true. The monument isn't at the building, it's at the park.
Yeah, because proactively they said, you know, the residential school where our languages were essentially beat out of us is not what we want to commemorate. It's the playground where we kept the language. So kind of unrelated to what you're saying, but similar context.
Had a Herb Snake went to the army, and one of our members, and I know there was probably more, but he came back from there, and a lot of times people would drink all the time because that was their way of coping.
Yes.
But only didn't speak the language when he was drinking, so they would have these parties, drinking parties, and what they would do is speak the language. Venus White was another one. I remember going over to my aunt and uncle, and he's there, and I don't think I've ever heard him speak English actually, but you know, he'd come in and he would just start talking in language. But that's what they did, like their way of coping. But they did speak the language. So I've heard it as a younger person from people, but those people are all gone now.
Yes.
But yeah, and they laughed a lot too.
The only other thing that I remember reading about regarding in the military too was during the, I think, Battle of the Crater during the Civil War, that there were other tribal members I know from the Menominee who are our neighbors, that you'd hear the chanting, and you'd hear when they were being, you know, shot at and people were dying, that you'd hear the chanting and singing in their language. So, yeah.
Well, I have a question. I consider myself to be a creative person. So this idea of artificial intelligence and making. However, when Ian says he's given a 7-page thing and he has to translate it, would it be permissible to teach the machine how to do translation? Because I don't think there's really a lot of creative stuff, and there's a large, and that dictionary is really thick. Would it be permissible, and do you think it's a good idea to teach the machine how to translate?
Just kind of as a thought relating to that, and again, I'm not a language speaker and I don't do language work, but in Canada, we have our Federal Research Council, SSHRC, which awards grants essentially for research projects in academic institutions, but also increasingly they're giving research grants to Indigenous community organizations and kind of community scholarship. And we're seeing a lot of applications right now for sort of the intersections between Indigenous culture and artificial intelligence. And we're trying to, from the granting or federal granting agency perspective, kind of dealing with the ethical questions associated with it, and I don't really have an answer, but it's just interesting right now because there's a lot of grant applications coming. And there's a lot of international projects in the United States, in Canada, in South America as well, about how to deal with sort of these ethical implications of the technology. And I have no answers, but just that it's definitely that conversation is happening about what the approach is. And I think Jamie, do you have more to add?
Yeah, just speaking on like the tools to create that, there's kind of like they're owned by, you know, corporations that have their own interests. So like giving up language to those tools sometimes benefits that corporation that owns those tools, that runs those tools. So there is like ethical problems with that, with kind of, you know, giving up sovereignty to the language almost to these people that, so there's lots of projects with different indigenous languages. There are lots of communities are kind of dealing with this and like how to do it so that, you know, they retain control. So there's a project in New Zealand where they run like all the mainframe computers, everything themselves. Like they've created their own infrastructure to do that so that they have full control over the tool set and the actual AI afterwards to then facilitate their translations. And
who's controlling it? It's the community?
The community themselves, yeah, they have their own control. Whereas like using like OpenAI's kind of tool set from, you know, Google or all these other corporations, there's, you know, they'll love to be like, hey, here's all these free stuff. We get, you know, but we also benefit, and then you lose a sovereignty. It's another form of colonization, basically. So it's great, but there's, you know, there's always problems.
Yeah, I think that really is an issue too, because there are some private companies that are trying to make money from this.
Yeah, they're sucking up content like a vacuum cleaner,
Right.
and then it doesn't belong to them necessarily, because they're going out there now and taking content. And that's, I see it like it's a threat.
Yeah, I was actually speaking to a linguist a few days ago at Montclair, who he had worked for a company that did some of this sort of work, and in fact he ended up quitting because he felt that they were doing a certain amount of cultural appropriation. He didn't feel comfortable doing it anymore. The problem with Munsee, of course, also, I'm not sure if it would work anyway, because there just is, you know, we don't have a big database of information. I mean, one of the reasons Google Translate works is because there's just so much Russian, French, and Spanish that you can just, you know, search and find text that's easily translatable. I would be worried that if you tried to do that for Munsee, you would just not get a very good output. But I think actually maybe the ethical problems are probably almost more serious.
Yeah, I offer, there is a source in the States that happen to work with them, the Native Biodata Consortium. They're based on Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation, but it's I think in this hemisphere, they're a significant source. We work with the Maori and have been at the United Nations and so forth. So it started, it's 5 years old, you're hitting our 5-year anniversary this month. It started with just genetic data. That was the biggest issue, was indigenous genetic data. And now it's just data, and it's moving so fast. So I know that I've had a couple of conversations, so it'd be wonderful to see one of the scientists from that group talking, especially using archival sources. Languages, you know, there's been Lakota language issues on who owns the language, which is just a crazy thing to even think of. So anyway, so I just point to that source there. It's an indigenous group, and they're dedicated to all of these ethical issues on nativebio.org.
I'm not an expert on natural language processing, but I know a little bit. So essentially, if you want to circumvent these big companies, there are open source models for computer architectures, which are basically like the raw brain, and then you can train that brain on a lot of data. The problem is there's not a lot of data. So, and there's also the ethical issue of if you generate data, is that clean now? Because it's machine made, and you're already, if you have a language like Spanish, there's already a lot of data, but here you might be overloading the limited data. There are solutions for a endangered language in Siberia in northern Russia. I think it's called Saki. It's a Turkic language. So what they did was they did a translation from Russian to Turkish or Kazakh, or one big language basically, because there's a lot of data from here to here. And then because this language and that rare language are similar, they did some translation from here to here. So that would be something like going from English to Anishinaabe, which might have more data, and then Anishinaabe to Munsee, which are closer. So it's easier to translate. However, obviously, the main important thing is the ethical issues, and then you can focus on the implementation of how you can.
Is this data, is it oral, or is it all written?
I believe all of that is written. So there is probably a way to go. I think if you're doing oral translation, it still has to go through like a written stage. So transcribing that and then doing the written to written and then the written to oral. So it would still like need to go through the written pipeline, if that makes sense. And there's like, to oversimplify, there's like two main types of translation. There's like old translation, and then the new translation is the one that's come out in like the last couple of years, which are like transformer architectures, very complex, like throw a bunch of data at a machine, let it figure itself out, sort of thing. So the older translation might be something like, if you take a Munsee word, for example, you can say, oh, this is plural. Can I find the singular version of that word? So if you have like, takwahak, you can say ak, that's plural. Now, can I find takwah in the dictionary? Oh, that's singular. So turtle plus S equals turtles. So that's like an easy, like analog translator almost.
Of course, that's always very dangerous.
Right,
because,
exactly.
You know, you could take an English word and you can say pants. Well, obviously we have the word pants, therefore that's the plural of a word pants. Well, yeah, that doesn't, like, the thing is that it's very easy to start generating things that don't exist if you don't actually check with someone who actually speaks the language that can tell you, because there are words in Munsee that only exist in the plural. So obviously you don't want to generate a word that no speaker would recognize.
I think local arrangements privilege to say we're a little over, but we're also anticipating the conversation that will be happening in the next session about what kind of tools are available for support. How can digital tools be helpful in what the communities want to do?
So, yeah, no, I was just gonna say that, we're gonna break for now, we're gonna have some coffee, and I think we're gonna try to start by 11:05, and we're gonna continue a little bit of this conversation with the next presentation. So it's Jamie and Tristan. And the coffee is right in the same place for breakfast, so right up.